Before I start, let's start with this land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the University of Pennsylvania is situated among the ancestral homeland and territory of the Lenni Lenape peoples. As members of an educational community, we are obligated to know the histories of dispossession that have allowed the University of Pennsylvania to grow and thrive on this vibrant terrain. As designers and thinkers, we endeavor to build in ways that lead toward justice, and we are committed to working to dismantle the ongoing consequences of settler colonialism. So before I introduce our lecture guests tonight, I want to thank the Jeffrey Fine and Andrea Katz Lecture Fund. It was established in May 2019 through a generous gift from Jeff Fine and his wife, Andrea Katz. The fund supports an annual public lecture featuring distinguished architects at Weitzman. Jeff, he's a two-time Penn graduate, both BA in Design of the Environment and also MMarch from 1978, is the founding partner of Pierre Fine Associates and an active member of Weitzman's Board of Advisors. His wife, Dr. Andrea Katz, is an ophthalmologist at Mount Sinai. Due to rescheduling, Jeff is unable to attend this evening, but we are grateful for the contribution of support that enables Lina to come. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Lina. She just landed from Paris, so I think it's more like midnight for her. And it's just such a pleasure to welcome Lina. And it's Lina's first time in Philadelphia, believe it or not. So Lina, she's a Paris-based architect whose work exemplifies an innovative fusion of history, memory, and architecture. Born and raised in Beirut, Lina's personal and professional trajectory has been deeply influenced by the rich civilizations and turbulent histories that have shaped her homeland. Of course, we all know it's not in past tense. It's happening as we speak, that turbulence. Her approach, which she describes as an archeology of the future, is not merely a design method, but a philosophy of architectural practice that unearth the layers of history and materiality embedded in place, allowing architecture to emerge as both a product and a conversation with time. Lina Ghotmeh's projects, from her celebrated Stone Garden Tower in Beirut to the iconic 2023 Serpentine Pavilion, have garnered international recognition for their sensitivity to cultural and environmental context. Her work is grounded in deep historical research, where she, as she notes, quote, "Architecture is not drawn, but excavated," unquote, allowing space to speak through its own past and materials. This humanistic approach, one that emphasizes craft and power of the hand, is evident in her projects like the Hermes workshops in Normandy, where she masterfully marries traditional craftsmanship with contemporary sustainability. Critics have noted the powerful tension in her work, with Dezeen describing the Stone Garden, I think it was Building of the Year 2021, as concrete manifestation of Beirut's scars and resilience. Her architecture does not merely inhabit space, but transforms it, inviting both individual and collective memory into a dynamic dialogue. As architectural historian Paul Goldberger observed, her work, quote, foregrounds the narrative of place in a way that brings history into the present and positions it as lens through which the future is imagined, unquote. Ghotmeh's numerous accolades includes the Schilling Architectural Prize, and her inclusion in Great Arab Minds underscores her role as a leading figure in the global architecture discourse. As we look into the future of sustainable design, Ghotmeh's commitment to integrating memory, craft, and innovation offers a vital model for rethinking how we build and rebuilding the environment we inhabit. It is with great anticipation that we welcome Lina Ghotmeh to share her vision and insight tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rosanna, for this introduction, and thank you for inviting me for the lecture here at UPenn School. It's a really great pleasure. And thanks also for the supporters for the series of lectures, giving really diverse voices and allowing sharing actually methodologies of work, architecture with all of you. So I would like to talk about the process of my work through my practice and architecture that cares, that talks about the environment, and what actually challenges us today as architects. And every time we start our work, it's really a privilege for us as architects that we start with this habitat that is Earth, that pushes us to think about our place where we live beyond the boundaries of the nation or the country in which we are living. And it allows us to think about the future of this planet. And it is essential that we're thinking about it because we know that today we need almost two Earths to sustain our consumption on Earth. So, how do we build and how do we think about both the context but also Earth in its globality? And growing up in Beirut has really influenced my way of thinking, my way of looking at spaces. This is a photography by Joe Kisirwani of Beirut, as it is like a concrete jungle that is really encroaching on the sea. But yet, beauty is always present with this like a blue, the Mediterranean blue that really flattens everything that human beings would have constructed. And as I said, the advent of the Anthropocene is really also spelling an end of this binary vision that we have between the human and the environment. So there is no more dichotomy between Earth and the world. And actually, Earth doesn't need us to survive, but we do need Earth to survive. And scientists tell us that we are more microbes than we are humans. So at the end, it's really not about humans on Earth. It's about like the invisible power that constitute Earth. And they say actually that we are more microbiota, so more 40% of our body is really composed by those microorganisms. So there is a sense of continuity between us and the environment. And as we see here at Chimboldo's drawing or painting, like we are vegetables, we are really organic matter that disappears. So that asks the question: how much nature in architecture? Nature, not necessarily in its just vegetated form, but also nature in terms of this relationship that we can install with the environment. Those questions are very much present in Beirut, a very small geography where all the mishap of the world are happening, but also a place where every time we destroy a building or like dig in, we discover archaeologies, we discover like how nature is taking over those archaeologies, but also discover the layers of histories that constitute that city. We see also how architecture weathers away, how it becomes like traces. So it gives you a different perception of what is architecture really and how can we grasp it, but also links us to history. So every time we're thinking about a project, we're really going back to the history of a typology, how we evolved, why are we building towers today, and how can we anchor construction in its environment, in its underground, in that ground in which it emerges. And as Rosanna also introduced, like this idea of thinking of architecture as sculpted from its place, as emerging from those origins, like this obelisk that we see here, that is sculpted in Egypt, that has been started to be sculpted, but it really left out within this mass of stone. So it's a work of digging, it's a work of research where we're looking at the origins of every typology, but also thinking about this relationship of to the living world in a way. So this process is one that is multifaceted. It doesn't just use one kind of tool or one tool of making. It looks at computer like programming, but also it looks at the hand, it looks at models, at crafting, at referencing, like looking at histories, at ideas, and of course at dialogues. And it takes form of tests, so it's iterative. It's every time you're looking at different forms, shapes, and looking at their interaction with the environment, with the context in which one is building. The hand has a very important role also in the making. The hand as a way of relating to the space, to relating to the material, relating to to the body, but also manifesting our sensitivity as sensitive beings with the relationship with the material itself. I'm showing here a series of also projects that are more related to this smaller scale, the scale of the object, the scale of the interior, the scale of what touches, what you touch with your hand in the foremost. These are like small details in a bar that was made in earth, in a restaurant in Palais Tokyo in Paris. So it's really about trying to think of this relationship that we have with our environment. What pushes you to touch your surrounding, and to be aware of this continuity that we have to constitute with that surrounding. And it always solicits the work of the hand, the work of glass, the transformation of materials into other materials, like drying like the melting of the glass, making it like this artisanal green glass, inserting it into an interior, and then drawing patterns, and then becoming a boutique for a chocolate maker, but also thinking about what are our means for creating a space, and here more looking at light also as an element of shaping a space, shaping an environment, shaping also an atmosphere within one environment. And then from there, an interest in exhibitions and in working with art, looking at textures and looking at how do you orchestrate a space around an artwork. And this is the work of Olga de Amaral, who's a Colombian artist. And we just finished this exhibition design in Fondation Cartier around her work. But you start to learn also. You learn from those works that really talk about time, the time of making by hand, and where here there are more than 20 women knitting and working on those amazing tapestries that have been also throughout time not recognized as artworks. So our role as architects are really to bring into also space, to bring into understanding works that may have been undervalued, and bring them into value again through an orchestration of space. And this work of the hand is also expanded on the work of architecture. And here I just a glimpse into the a work for the Olympics that we just realized just last year, or this year actually, for the Olympics in Paris. And it was about housing for Olympics. So how do we bring this idea of the tool, or like the memory of the launching of this arc into the building for athletes in Paris. So when moving into architecture a field that is complex, that has to deal with complexity constantly, we try to make sense of it, and we try to situate it between archaeology, between nature, between humanity, and between the future. And when I'm saying archaeology of the future, it's because actually architecture is always soliciting the past in a certain way. That's where we're talking about archaeology. It's about digging and trying to find stories, finding traces of what exists already. And in archaeology, we're talking about the past, because the place, the stories that exist, the earth, the memory. And when we're talking about the future, it's because every act of architecture has a newness to it. So how do we talk about also the future as an act of emergence that brings the past into that unknown, and that questions, that brings originality in its form? But also about equality, technology, innovation. And of course, we're talking about an architecture that is about humanity, that is humane. It has to be, appropriated by its users. So it's inclusive. It talks about society, about craft, but also about nature and the way it encompasses the living environment. And in that sense, it's a sort of archaeology of the future, where we're trying to make sense of both the past and future in our present time when we're designing. So, along those lines and along the lines of an architecture that cares about various subjects, I would like to go more thoroughly into some projects. The first one is that deals more with heavy history, that is a bit of a repeating history as well. And it's the Estonian National Museum. And this is a project that is situated in Tartu in Estonia. And it's the project for which I started my practice. So it was an open competition that was launched by Estonia back in 2005. I was 25 years at that time. And I entered this competition with two colleagues of mine. We won the project and we set it up our practice after winning this project. So it took 10 years to construct. But it's really a very interesting story because it's the story of the Estonians who fought for their independence and who also wanted to build their national museum in Tartu. So Estonia is south of Finland. It lived the Soviet occupation and it had its independence in 91. In 2003, it joined the European Union, and the museum was for them a way to reaffirm that identity and to talk about the fact that they have collected all through their time all these objects that talk about an identity that is more phenoegric, that really resisted the occupations over the time. And they have objects that are really interesting for the sake of the stories that they are constantly telling about with their collection. And when we looked at the site of the competition, we noticed that there is this kind of a scar that really cuts into that ground and that the competition brief didn't talk about. And the site actually that was assigned for the competition was this land that is here. And they didn't really mention what's this, large scar in the landscape. And then when we started to research about that, we discovered that actually this is one of the largest military airfields that was for the Soviet times, and it's the largest one of the Baltic states. And this is also the place where a lot of Estonians were coming to manifest for their independence, to really fight that occupation. And it's really a fantastic space. I studied in '98 architecture, and during the years of studies, we looked at those drawings of Super Studio, where we have seen this continuous monument that just was drawn, talking about dystopian architecture, but at the same time, this kind of potential for a situationist city. So we thought that it's important that this museum really talks and connects to that airfield, that it's not just sitting in its, independently on the site that was assigned by the competition, but it actually bridges to that airfield and it becomes more of a land art, or maybe it's a structure that is able to regenerate its surrounding. It becomes more urban. It also talks about the past, and we discovered afterwards when we won this project that really they didn't want to talk about that airfield, that they wanted to erase that history. But yet it was important that architecture really connects to that history and converse actually with what exists in place, but also allows it to be reappropriated by the people. And this is exactly what happened when we started constructing the building. All the Estonians were coming from the city center, from all over Estonia, and really manifesting for this first like time of construction for the project, like the first stone. In that case, it was more like digging and pulling into the concrete. And when we saw the project started construction, it really looked like an archaeology, as if it's really emerging from the ground itself. And then with this monumentality, the idea was also to bring the human scale into the project, not only having like this kind of monumental architecture that is connecting to the ground, but really soliciting the scale of the body, soliciting again the scales of the many houses that exist in Tartu through the interior of the building. So it's a bit like a kind of a cultural incubator where you have exhibitions, you have also various activities like a conference center here. And you discover also that the museums are not only about exhibitions. Actually, exhibitions mainly constitute maybe 20% of a museum. And they're really constituted of all the offices of conservation and all other activities that constitute the life of a museum. So the museum appears from one side as this large canopy that maybe echoes the wings of the planes that used to land here, but at the same time that comes in and dies into the landscape. So as the landscape moves, or as you move in the landscape, the museum really dies into that ground. And all the skin is about this pattern, and it's a pattern that was knitted by many women during occupation time as a way to resist occupation, as a way to be vocal about, another language, and to consistently really work on this healing process through knitting. So symbolically, this like the skin of the building is gowned with the same like pattern that was also gowning the bodies of Estonians. And we can still see this pattern with a lot of knitting work that we see here. So as we see the entrance here, it's really like coming into the scale of the persons. So it's really going from like more than 7 meters up into 3 meters. So inviting one into the scale of the interior of the building. And then the idea and the challenge was always to defend an architecture that is generous, that allows spaces of serendipity that are not necessarily programmed. So you have spaces for a shop, for example, or a library, but yet in between those open spaces become spaces where the Estonians manifest and express their culture. So it's not only about what we design as architects; it's also what happens in between actually, and becomes a place for for intervention and for performance. And funnily enough, actually, the spaces that we fought through with the clients, because they wanted to, condense the building, and we were always fighting to have those spaces, became really the places where they gather, where they make their, talks, and where they sing, and really continue to produce culture in a way. And then the exhibition spaces are places for education. And as you move from through the museum, then you have the second entrance or exit, where the museum really meets that airfield, and this is where it becomes that open platform that we see here. So from one side, it's a kind of a monumental structure with this, cantilever, and from the other side, it really is dying into the landscape. So it's also about the capacity of architecture to disappear, to be its context at some point as well. And it is its context through also the weather, through through the different seasons that we see, like here under snow. And then as it really connects to the landscape, it's really transforming in the way it looks. And I want to, I'll let you see it. But finally, what's really the most interesting is how also people appropriate structures in the way that we don't preview them. So this is a film that was produced by Estonian cinematographers, and they appropriated this scaffolding, like the metal structure of the cantilever, where the lady was knitting in red, and here on the bridge part that connects two parts of the building with the lake underneath the sky. So it's really also interesting how architecture could inspire and could be really appropriated differently. The second project is a project in Beirut, in Lebanon, and it's about maybe caring to heal, or what can architecture do actually in relationship to what a city could have lived and is still living. And it's named Stone Garden. It's a housing, and it's a project also where there is a gallery for debate and for photography in the Middle East. And this project is by the port area. So as we see it rising here, it really is about also talking with its context, talking with its surrounding. And it's this port area where the explosion had happened in 2020 recently. And if we look at Beirut, it's a city in constant transformation. So we can see those houses, those small houses that talk about the Ottoman times of Beirut. We see these developers' towers rising, and it's this kind of unplanned, unurbanized, with no general urban plan for the city, where it's constantly in construction. It's also a city of contradiction, where places are, partying, other places bombarded. It's this kind of conjunction of various living possibilities as well. But as we see the city or its map, it's really like a palimpsest. It's constantly rewritten, and like this map drawn by Zarina Hashimi, an artist, it's really like almost erased and rewritten all the time. And how can you capture actually identity within this kind of context? We have this city also, we see all these old houses where nature exists within within the interstitial parts of those houses, but also you can see this kind of fantastic staircase rising up. Other like more informal constructions, nature again organically being present here, and situations that really talk about housing situations in the world, and how can we address those with the history of those, Ottoman photo of the Ottoman times, with the city getting like jetting into the water, and those wonderful houses that are always threatened. So the question of identity is very much present here, and the site of this project is really very close to the city center of Beirut. So the city center of Beirut was completely demolished after the civil war. And the site is really on the port area. It was one of the first concrete factory that was established here. And as we look at the city center, it was also reconstructed after in around 98. And with the reconstruction that had happened, really the memory of of the destruction had completely disappeared, and very quickly. So there's a sense of gentrification that had happened, but also a question towards the memory of the city, the memory of the war, the memory, and how do we deal with that? How do we heal actually after such an event? Some of the pictures of Fuad al-Khoury, who happened also to be my client for this building, has really captured those moments of destruction of the city center. And in 98, along with Gabriel Basilico and other renowned photographers, they really captured the city center. They captured those moments of destruction that had happened. It's really unfortunate that today we are going to see those again. I mean, when I used to lecture, I used to say that this is, those are pictures of moments that I've seen in Beirut, but that are, transformed. And now again, they are coming to the city. And you see this kind of frail moment where human beings also become like their environment, as frail and as devastated. So the building is really kind of maybe it tries to encapsulate those moments that I did live also in Beirut, and try to talk about an architecture for a tower that dialogues with the Mediterranean climate, that is not just a glass tower, and that is about those openings, those loggias that become places for life, that also have different heights and house different types of nature within. We see here like this concrete structure that is emerging. And as the windows open to the outside, they frame the city differently. They're not only, viewing points, but they're also tools or like means also to frame the city, to bring it as a photography within the apartments, but also to critically assess the way this city has been constructed. And we can see here within the same apartment, and these photos I took them during construction time, where it was more darker inside. I actually dimmed down the images, but you could see really like from different sides, different conditions, also urban conditions of the city of Beirut. And here it opens also towards the silo. So this is where the explosion had happened in 2020 that devastated a big part of the city as well. And moments also of double height openings remind us of those, moments where other buildings have been eaten up by bullets or by explosions. And in this sense, actually, the moments that were more like tumultuous for Beirut become places where humans are present again and reappropriate those moments of more inhabiting and life. And the building is not only about just structure; it's really about its grounding. It's belonging to to earth, to the ground, and in a way talks about nature as it exists in the city, more organic, more free, and also scales of nature. So the idea of those windows is really to house different scales of nature. So you have the flower pot, or like the bigger, plant, or even the tree on a double height window. And they exist within this loggia, so it's not a balcony. And I don't know if it happens actually in Philadelphia or even in Shanghai, but sometimes when you build those balconies in residential buildings, directly the users like glass them. So the challenge here was, how do you do like a balcony without having this problem afterwards that, alters in a way the architecture in an undesired way. It could be interesting if you desire it, but here we also look at the context. We look at how this structure exists within the existing towers. Another side also to this architecture was how do you change also this kind of repetition of the same apartments that we see over and over in the city. You have this kind of a plan that is mushrooming, and by these openings and by these loggias, every floor became different, and every housing could be really appropriated in a different way and more individualized in a way. So there's no repetition in a way in the way of living or like dictating the same plan over and over. These are some photos of the interiors, and as we see here, like this kind of a window becomes more like a frame towards the outside. And the building really is about drawing the like the outline of its site, and its form is really creating in three-dimensional form, like manifesting this urban regulation that is generally somehow invisible, that we don't see it because we just draw through it, but generally it disappears if the building, for example, was just a tower that is a cube that goes up. So it's about really rendering also visible elements that constitute the city that we don't generally manifest. And this ground floor was about also that we saw here, like this is the dedicated for photography and for different art performances. And we tried also during the Biennale of Venice in 2021 to talk also about the art ground in Beirut and Lebanon, and to see and to talk about those places where instability is happening as places where also creativity and where architecture and art play a crucial role in the healing process, but also in reassessing critically situations and the political climate. So inside this model, we exhibited series of photographies of various artists and like photographers within in Beirut that talk about Beirut itself. But we also showed really how the process of making of this facade came to be, like almost a baking process. And about that envelope, it was for me very important that we work with the various hands that are coming from Syria, coming from neighboring countries to work on the facade and to bring on the hand again in the making process. So the whole facade was a kind of a rendering process where I drew this kind of comb and then we combed the whole elevation. So like almost like you're working the ground, and this is like a custom design, like custom made comb, like a metal comb, and then it was just scratching this elevation. And the process started with those clay models in the studio. So, really working on this clay with the fork, and then moving on that on real scale, and allowing the building really to talk about this kind of emotional emergence in the city, connecting with its surrounding, and somehow like shying away from the standard process of cladding that we could see in other buildings in today in in architecture industry and construction industry. And after the explosion that happened in the silo, actually the project and the shell of this building really was resisting that explosion. And somehow it really communicated with the situation of Beirut at the end. It was almost like a bunker that was standing there. All the interior were devastated, but the nature was there, and the structure just withstood that explosion. And those are photos after the explosion, where we see like what had happened also around, and how it actually just stayed there and almost like shielded also its environment from that time. This is an interesting photo where we can almost feel like this is taken in the 80s. And of course, the tower looks tiny in relation to other towers in the city. Another third project that I go through more also thoroughly is about creating impact. And this is a leather workshop that we delivered in Normandy last year in France. And it's the first low carbon energy positive building that is constructed in France, and it's a manufacturing facility. So it's really complex to arrive to have a low carbon and a very ecological construction for a manufacturing facility. And to be able to do that, you have to really tackle a project from like various dimensions. So from the first part is really the content of this building is about working with the hand, working with leather making, and the challenge is really how to design, a building in a context where you are in a very industrial context, all while nature in that place is really fantastic. So there's always a contradiction between all the industrial architecture that is set up in suburban places, and it's really ruining that beauty of nature that exists. So the challenge is really going away from the prototype of the industrial architecture and allowing maybe another architecture that or like unstigmatizing really industrial architecture in a way. And we work with leather here, like also the leather making is really about precision, about the work of the hand, about really tracing. And we started looking at the material in the beginning. So what can we build with, and what are the resources that are present around that place? And we discovered that there are three brick makers, like local brick makers, artisanal brick makers that are around the site. And we decided to go back to brick making, which is almost forgotten today, is really just used for renovation. And really research how this work with the brick can start to express the building as a tool, building as a lively place, but also that it expresses time in a way. And this process became a research process that allowed us also to tackle three elements: energy, and how do we produce energy in the project, how do we use materials that are low carbon, and how do we allow an architecture that is anchored for like people. So when talking about energy, one more technically, actually, it pushes you as an architect not only to look at architecture as a form, as a collection of material, but as a living organism that is that needs matter to perform. And how do you move from a standard construction bit by bit towards structure that is more low in its energy consumption, but not only low, but it's passive, it's positive, it is able to distribute its own energy. And the first approach is to build a building that is bioclimatic. So it's compact, it really it's thought in a coherent way in relationship to its program. It is also a building that that is defined by its program. Like, for example, all the ateliers are positioned on the north and really reduce the distances within, so it impacts the land the least possible. And the other side is really, like I said earlier, is how do you bring also the program to respond to just rudimentary element that we forget in today's architecture, maybe, like placing like ateliers that need diffuse light on the north, taking advantage of the light, the natural light. And here we see like all these sheds that allow light into the workshops, allowing natural ventilation within this building, taking advantage of nature to shield the facade of this building as well. And we discover by just doing this bioclimatic approach, we reduce the need of energy for this building. So we get closer to that zone of comfort of human beings. So we need less actually energy to consume in order to make this building function. And the second side is how to use all the material that have the least carbon footprint. And instead of using metal, you start using wood, and using concrete, you use bricks. And then the building becomes more like a natural, made of natural material, almost like biosourced. And also using bricks, building with the earth of the site. And here we can see like this earth that is very clay-like, that allowed us to make 550,000 bricks, work them with the artisans, and then use the traditional ovens to make them, dry them, and then the people and the artisans working on them are really proud also of making that building. And then we see here the process of making and really working on the bricks by hand, cooking them. And then when we arrived to the site, how to build. And we discovered that there were no more masons that are able to build with bricks. So we had to form also the masons to brick again, to work with bricks again, and to build, like an architecture that is structurally made with bricks. Something interesting also that the drawings that we did, like the elevations, were printed into one-to-one and were guides actually into the making of the project. So we can see here the process and this kind of use of little material also to produce that arch here. And this is also possible because of our tools of calculation today. And then those arches are also expression of horses, the gallops of horses, because this is the first saddlery actually for Hermès, where they produce saddles. And it's about this kind of movement on the elevation that we can see here, echoing like those, like this movement also of the horse, the gallops. And always this relationship with the outside. So here nature is coming into the building. So as we enter into a courtyard and it's open to the outside. It's really about this kind of porosity of architecture. And people are using this outside as well for become places for them to gather. And then as we enter inside the building with those arches, which are the natural span actually for construction in brick, we can see those arches. They are reproduced with the many forms also of tools that the artisans are working with, this kind of curve that exists also with the objects themselves, and the continuity also of spaces from one another. And here with the atelier, the light coming in. And it's really at the end a place for people and for them to enjoy and to work within this place. The landscape was done by the earth of the site. So as we excavated for building, we used all the earth that was excavated to produce all the landscaping. So we don't move earth again, and we don't, have to transport it somewhere else, causing more carbon footprint. So it's really created this landscape, and then using natural like species from the locally. And we worked with a Belgian landscape designer, Eric Dont, here for the landscaping. And all those formwork that were used for the arches became benches within the outside. And just to finish on two notes, so the possibility of architecture that is for gathering, and this is the Serpentine Pavilion. And as you may know, the Serpentine is built just in front of the Serpentine galleries. And the idea of this pavilion was really to trace those canopies of the trees, to allow really a place of serenity, a low construction that is not trying to compete or to compete with its environment, but it's a place of gathering. It's a place that talks about the modularity of its construction, that is assemblable, disassemblable. It's really also echoing nature in its own structure, and about this kind of fins that are repeated, that are arrayed, and that finally constitute a certain organicity, all while being really somehow a system of repetition. And as a leaf, actually, these main structure are reinforced by secondary structure that constitute in a way that ceiling. And it echoes also structures that are built in Mali, which we call Toguna, and they were built by the Dogon people. And their structures were very heavy roofs that where like elderly of villages they meet, and it allows them to stay non-violent, to reach their agreement, because if they want to fight, they will just bump their head. So the idea is really to have this kind of low architecture that invites one into a moment of somehow silence as well, or celebration as we see it here. And in terms of reusing wood, actually, this is something that we're continuing to work on. And today we're working on the Bahrain Pavilion for Osaka. And of course, constructing pavilions is always a question. What do you do with the resources? And here we decided to build a structure that is like almost like a boat or a dhow, like that is embarking in Osaka, but is all built with pieces of wood that can be completely reused. They're unengineered woods and just like rising up into that structure. They echo also traditions of Bahrain, of dough making, but also of Osaka and Japanese wood making. So at the end, it's really about this idea of caring, of making by hand, but also caring about the environment at large. Thank you so much for listening and bearing with me because it's 2 o'clock in the morning, party time. Yes, okay. Yes. Can I have some water?
Uh, Hello, thank you for the wonderful lecture. One thing I realize is your design starts from unearthing like human context and draw idea from human context to develop it and then think about human and the nature. And my question here is, uh, does it means like human as primary sources of your like design inspiration and then nature comes as secondary, or are you incorporating human context and the nature to unearth it?
Thank you. That's a very interesting question because I'm always thinking, like, as I try to introduce in the beginning of the lecture, that we are part of nature. So, in a way, trying to blur that dichotomy that may exist between what is nature and what is human, and that's why also most of the project invite nature as part of their spaces. So the Hermes project is about really bringing in that garden and trying to draw that cloister that almost you're entering into a ruin. So architecture become almost ruinous at that moment, and then opens up to nature, opens up to the living that we don't see necessarily with the eye. And also with the textures and the question of texture and architecture, it's about also the porosity, the fact that it's not about this flatness and cleanliness of architecture. There's an interesting book by Beatrice Colomina, Are We Human, that she wrote with Mark Wigley. I guess maybe you've read it, but it's this idea of the kind of clean architecture, and like how do we go beyond the clean, like hygienic architecture that we have been producing. And in that sense, it invites bacteria, it invites the invisible, it invites nature as part of the also architecture and part of us as humans.
Thank you.
Thank you. You can ask questions. I'm still in form, shape.
You might get this question a lot, but you work in so many different contexts um, around the world. What is your And over the years also, so there's this place and time. What have you learned about working in different contexts, whether it's, geological, geographical, political, social, cultural? What are some lessons that you have found? Because you're from one place. Well, you're from multiple places as well. You shift, but each given time you're only in one, you can occupy one kind of identity in one place. But as an architect who, sometimes work in France and in Lebanon and Tokyo, or sorry, Osaka, um, how do you deal with that kind of shifting identity?
I think it's a great learning experience about diversity and the importance of diversity. I think maybe as I grew up in Beirut, there is a sense of capacity also for you to be able directly to shift, because maybe it's because this country has lived so many different civilizations, and it's a diverse place where you don't have one culture or one religion, so it allows you to always be in confrontation with the other, and that's what's the most exciting about it. So there's a sense of home that I find in every place I work with, where the culture and people are different, and there's a great enrichment as well, because you can also understand like that everything is possible in a way that it's just a matter of working along with the same vision and with the people, and at the end it's about bringing people together towards one thing that one wants to construct. For example, for this project in Osaka, at the building pavilions in Osaka at the moment is very complex, because they don't have contractors. Everything had tripled the prices, materials, etc. So we came into the project quite late, because the Bahrain pavilion didn't take themselves, they didn't start the project very in advance. And we were afraid that we would not find someone to build. But when I was designing with my team this project, we started thinking, how can we design this project in a way that talks also to the Japanese, talks to the craft, talks to the knowledge as well. So we ended up not having the problems to build the project, and we found directly a construction company. They were very motivated. The last time I went there, they were really happy. They were like, "Oh, we're very happy with the." So it's kind of a joy also that your building is not about just you as an architect. It becomes a process of making that includes also the makers with you. So and that's what you learn most while working with other cultures, that you also have to understand the culture, the place, make that effort actually to know its resources, to be able to build there.
Thank you, Lina, for a fabulous lecture. And in a way, the question that I was going to ask, you've almost answered it by answering Rosanna's question, but I'll ask it from a different perspective. We're educated and we're trained to present the work clearly, articulately, and in a complete sense of its being, from the Serpentine to the Stone Garden. You alluded at the very end of the Stone Garden to some of the traumas that happen in the afterlife, let's just say, of the project because of the explosion. But I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the space of contestation that you as an architect come up against when it comes to sourcing the materials, sourcing the labor, understanding the larger political context within a project that can be built or cannot be built. Could you help us understand how you navigate some of what is certainly in existence to create any project, but that for a number of reasons the presentation doesn't speak to tonight? I actually think hiding or obfuscating that is an act of caring for others, and I appreciate that. But maybe if you could tell us a little bit about some of the aspects that you have confronted in some of these projects that can help us understand how we can navigate what are sometimes the really difficult aspects of building projects.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, of course, when we're presenting like a narrative that feels like very smooth, that you don't see the time actually that had been through every project, whether it's the museum that took 10 years to be built, or even Stone Garden that almost took 10 years. This one that took four very, very intense months. So it's a condensation also of of struggles and of work, political work, where you as an architect, you're not only building a structure, but you become a politician, you become a constructor, you mediate through the project. And if we think of, for example, the project of the museum, when we won that project, there was a whole manifestation against the project in the beginning, because it was taken as if you're monumentalizing the Russian history. So there was a whole work that I had to go to Estonia to work with the mayors to present the project, to also allow another understanding or another vision of towards the heritage or towards the past as well. And that was also a way to gain the acceptability of the project. Then throughout the process, you have moments where you don't have budgets anymore for the construction. So how do you reach, how do you respond to such challenges without compromising on a project? Like the Serpentine Pavilion, the challenge is about building low carbon structures today, while and trying all as well to be innovative. So how do you, and what kind of material can you build with today, while you don't have enough materials that are that respond to the question of low carbon impact, because they're still embryonic actually as material studies. So it's really in the DNA of our practice to constantly be working with the challenges and drawing from those challenges opportunities to make architecture happen.
Hi, thank you so much for the lecture. I'm just a little curious, during the process of your works, do you consider yourself more of an observer with empathy or an experiencer? Because I really love the sense of humans in your works. I don't know if that's the right word to describe it, but I really love the senses of human inside. It feels like even after humans extinct, we can still feel the humans experience, and there's the sense of humans here. But if we're only like observing and like doing researches from the exterior view, it is really hard to make such impressive and deep designs. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question, because I always feel like I have to be in the place. When designing, when you're projecting yourself in the space that you're designing, when you're drawing a line and you are able to manifest it as you walk into the space, then it becomes dimension, it becomes material, it becomes human, becomes environment. So you have to be an actor in this space. You cannot be just an observer. Otherwise, you end up doing an object that is cold and distant from any other human being. So how do you inhabit the places that you're making, and try to imagine yourself and moving through those spaces? it directly obliges you to think of dimensions, to think about relationship to you, to the hand, to the body, to the senses, to the experience, to the light. So yeah, definitely as a inhabitor of this space.
Yeah, thank you very much for the very interesting presentation. One small side note before asking my question. I'm very happy to hear the story of the building of in Beirut, because back in my undergrad, it was actually one of the projects that was presented by one of my studio professors back in 2018. And I'm very happy to see that, to tell us or to see the continuity of the story of that building. And you told us that architecture tells stories, so thank you for telling us this story and carrying on the story. So that apart. So for my question, you expose projects that are stretching on a timeline of around 20 years. So starting from the project in Estonia to the current project in Osaka.
I feel old. Let's say
you don't look like I. I'm just saying, and I've noticed an emphasis more and more on the environmental impact of your buildings. And since you have dealt with, let's say, public command in a way, because it was published, the command was by the Estonian government and then the government of Bahrain. And I would love to ask you, how do you see this shift? Is it noticeable as an architecture in your practice and as an architect? Have you noticed this shift toward this? Have the public or the private command have become more aware of this problematic, and how do you see this evolution in the future?
Thank you so much. I'm happy you like the story of Stone Garden. I think I'm not sure it's a shift, because when I look back at the way I was producing architecture from the beginning of my practice, there is always a lot of thinking about nature, about maybe it's innate in the fact that you're living Beirut and you're looking at nature where it pops up and you have this light, the sun coming in and then brings on beauty. So directly nature has a strong sense in bringing beauty in a place. And having grown between the city and the mountain has always brought to me this kind of twofold relationship to an environment. One is urban, another one is natural, and nature has been very much in need also. So in a way, when designing, like in Estonia, it was with the means or the materials that were present, was about thinking of the building also in a way that it acts with its environment. So it's a low structure, it's a double facade. The internal facade has triple glazing and little windows. The outer facade is kind of creating a blanket around it. When you enter, because of the little means that they had to run the building, when you enter, you use the least air conditioning, so you have least maintenance. All the collection is put underground with concrete that used that really stabilizes the temperature, a special material. It's called iron concrete. It's really taking the humidity. So you try to work with material but also with systems that allow your building to be the least impactful and the least consuming for its environment. When building Stone Garden, again, the fact that it kind of learns from the vernacular, from those houses I would have seen in the villages that are small with smaller windows, and that really talk also about this climate that is warm in summertime, so and also keeps this kind of thermal mass. So the building is not about this glass structure. So in a way, it kind of talks about ecology, even if it's concrete structure, but it actually uses concrete to really stabilize its also temperature and create a thermal mass in this environment. So it does, in a way, act in a more vernacular way than than any other glass tower. And then pushing this idea further with the project of Hermès was really how we can reach even more an understanding of a relationship to sustainability, but ecology by not only the form, but also the mechanics of the building. And here it was like bringing energy from geothermal energy, etc. So it's kind of it's a development that through time you're able to do, because also the tools allow you to work on that further, and the knowledge is possible as well.
Thank you. Whoops, that was an amazing lecture. Thank you so much. So you start with a very small scale design, no, which is the hangar, and the question has to do with the relationship that the designs and the relationship that you establish across scales, and with those that are building the projects. I feel like there is a continuum, no, between the design process, reaching the moment of construction, and in your relationship with the builders, no. It from this project and the images that you show to the brick on the other project, and it also reminds me of the work of some friends of mine in Palestine, Bethlehem, Elias and Youssef Anastas, and also their work with local industries. They also work in small scale artifacts and bigger buildings. And anyway, just to make that connection with Palestine and their work, which I think is somehow related to yours too. Just because they're good friends, and to hear also from you how that transcalar and relationship to the construction and the people that are continuing to design as they build the project in its smallest scale elements. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I've seen them last week, by the way. Yeah, I think you're talking about continuum, but I think it's not a very linear process. Again, what I was trying to show in the beginning is this kind of mess also that is the studio with ideas and researches and materials. So it's not the design process is not a linear process, and it's also very frustrating to work the design process in a linear way, because you sometimes I feel it's not natural. You're starting with the idea concept, and then you're starting to look for the material, and then detail it, and then go to the construction, and then on your construction you want to change the project. But so that's why actually it's more like a circular process, where we try to start with the material. We try to start with what do we have around us, and how can we bring what's around us, and almost by hand, metaphorically speaking, and start building with it. And that also brings the desire to go to the smaller scale, and to be able to shift between the project, the building, its form, but also the sensitive scale, and the scale of what the hand can touch or can shape in a way. Thank you so much.
So kind.